So this is the beginning of chapter 16, the spinal cord and spinal nerves. So spinal cord is, oops, apparently my software is not working that well. Spinal cord, you may remember, is part of CNS, and nerves are part of PNS. Spinal refers to the fact that these come from the spinal cord versus cranial nerves, which were in chapter 15. Those are nerves that are also PNS. All nerves are, but they come out of the brainstem specifically. So now we're going to be talking about nerves that come out of the spinal cord. Spinal cord functions, pretty straightforward. I mean, it'll link the brain with most of the body. So if I can draw, a really terrible brain here, like that. So that would be like temporal lobe. Frontal lobe is a little small on this person. The spinal cord here would connect the brain with the rest of the body, like the end of the spinal cord, like that. So let's see if I can, I do get a different color. So if you can recall that, say, your arm out here, sensory information is going to go up from the body, up the spinal cord to the brain, and then motor information is going to be going down from the brain, actually from the frontal lobe. That's where voluntary motor is, would come down and then go to, say, your finger, to move your finger. So it's a pathway for information going up and down. And notice I said most of the body, and the reason I say most is because, in fact, there are cranial nerves, as you recall, that are coming out of the brain, and they're also doing important things like sensory of the face or motor to muscles that of facial expression or mastication. So most of the body is linked by the spinal cord, except for those areas, particularly in the head, that are covered by cranial nerves. Okay, another function, as I mentioned before, reflex. And a reflex, we'll get into this more, but it's an independent reaction to a stimulus, which means stimulus being like a hot stove, and your reaction being pulling away. And independent means that the spinal cord can process the information on its own. The spinal cord does not need any kind of help from the brain. So we'll talk about that more when we get to reflexes, but it's kind of interesting because it's the spinal cord processes and integrates information, and people assume it's only the brain that does that, but the spinal cord can do a little bit of it as well. Okay, so, get rid of the scrawls. Okay, the relationship between your vertebrae and your spinal cord. So the vertebrae referring to the bony vertebrae, which you may recall when you learn the skeleton. Details such as the vertebrae are divided up into different regions, like your neck region would be the cervical, I'm just going to abbreviate C. And then your area with your rib cage is the thoracic area of vertebrae. And then lumbars in your lower back. And then finally, the sacrum is that kind of triangle-shaped bone that's fused vertebrae that are wedged between your pelvic bones. And then you have a couple coccygeal vertebrae between 2 to 4. So the spinal cord is also divided up into sections that pretty closely correspond to the vertebrae. You also have levels of spinal cord levels and corresponding nerves that are numbered just like the vertebrae were. And so you may remember there was I did not have this quite down yet. Okay, you had a C1 vertebrae, which is the atlas. You also have a C1 nerve, and so on. And notice that C1 nerve here that comes, this is the C1 spinal cord level, and the nerve would come out here. And in this case, C1 nerve N comes out superior to, this case it would be the atlas or C1 vertebrae. And same with C2 comes out superior. C2 nerve comes out superior to the axis, and so on until you get to this weird one, 8. Now, there are only 7 cervical vertebrae, but there are actually 8 cervical nerves, which is interesting. And C8 does something a little bit different. C8 nerve comes out inferior to C7 and superior, actually, C7 vert, I should say, and comes out superior to T1. Again, there is a C8 nerve, but there is no C8 vertebrae. And then after C8, from T1 really on, every nerve will emerge inferior to its corresponding vertebrae. So let's just say it's, like it's possessive, it's vertebrae. So T1 nerve comes out inferior to T1 vertebrae, and so on all the way down. So this is maybe a bit strange. Why does it come out superior in the cervical region and inferior everywhere else? And then you have this, oops, gotta remember what I'm drawing. And you have this oddball C8. Why do we do that? Well, it's just simply there's one more nerve than there are vertebrae. So we had to add an extra somewhere, and that's where it got added, was in the cervical area. Okay, other important thing, relationship between the vertebral column and the spinal cord. At birth, the spinal cord and the vertebral column are about the same length, and as you grow, your spinal cord grows less than your vertebral column, than the bones do. And so by the time you reach adulthood, your spinal cord is shorter, and it actually ends right about at L1, L2 vertebrae. That's the end of your spinal cord, the nervous tissue. So what that means is when you look at the relationship between the spinal cord level and the place that it comes out, you know, superior or inferior to the vertebrae, up here in the cervical region, this is C1 spinal cord level, and C1 nerve comes out pretty much straight to the side, like perpendicular. So C6, for instance, nerve comes out straight out to the side. And as you start heading down, we're going to skip all the way down to, let's say, L3. By the time you get all the way down here, the L3 spinal cord level is way up here. And the nerve will come out, and it will have to go down and descend. And then it will come out at the vertebral level. So it has to go down a little bit because the spinal cord is shorter. And then if we went way down here, let's do S3. See, that's S3 spinal cord level. And then the spinal nerve is going to come down. I got to make sure I get S3. There we go. And then it's going to have to exit much lower than the spinal cord level. So the lower down the cord you go, the nerve has to descend through the vertebral column to get out. So again, up here in the upper regions, it just comes straight out to the side, horizontal. The farther you go down, you can see like T8, he has to go a little ways down. The farther down the cord you go, the more that the nerve has to go down or descend inferiorly through the vertebral canal in order to get out in between its corresponding vertebrae. So some more gross anatomy of the spinal cord. And this diagram is not the best. I think they should have maybe zoomed in a little bit more because it's hard to see what's going on down here where I really want you to see it. But I'll draw it in, and you should get it. It's not too terribly hard. Unfortunately, you would have seen this in lab, and it's a really spectacular dissection. In fact, this is a very nice photograph. I can see somebody's doing dishes behind me. I can see the very tip of the cord right here. And the cord comes down, and its tip forms a point at the very end, like a cone at the very end. And that end of the spinal cord we call the conus medullaris, which makes sense because it looks like a cone. So again, this is about L1, L2 vertebrae, but this would be the very, very tip, like the coccygeal nerves, the very, very end of the spinal cord. And in this diagram here, yeah, they labeled it here. It's a tiny little bit there that's pink. So it's kind of hard to see in this one. It's actually almost easier to see here on the cadaver. The other structure that I want you to know from this diagram, besides, well, we can see our, oops, my bad, gotta remember that. Okay. We can see already we've talked about cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and sacral parts of the cord, just like parts of the vertebrae. But the other major feature that I want you to notice, besides there's these same sections again and the tip of the cord, the conus medullaris. Also, I want you to notice these structures that are in the lumbar region of the vertebral canal, because there's no cord there, but there is stuff there, as you can see. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that conus medullaris again. Make it very pointy this time. And then, oh, there we go. I'm going to draw the nerves here in blue. So keep in mind, if we've got, say, this is L4 nerve, this would probably be more like a sacral. S4 nerve, you do have a right and a left, symmetrical. And then say S3 and so on. What you'll notice, oh, I should draw some lower ones too, is that you get this bundle of nerves here in the lumbar region of the vertebral canal. You can see it here as well. It's like strings of spaghetti. It is called, though, I don't know if you can read that, I'll write it big. That bundle is called the cauda equina, which means tail of a horse, or horse's tail. That is an A there, sorry. Cauda equina. So early anatomists thought this looked like a horse's tail. I think it looks like strings of spaghetti. But that's what's in the lumbar region of your vertebral canal, is this bundle of nerves.